Well, hi there guys, it's Mark here from Nomad Stays, calling in from our temporary office location in the Rhone River Valley in France. I'm here in the mountains, the Alps in the background, just doing a Facebook Live. I've got my Chief Happiness Officer with me today, and we're just going to walk down into the shade where it's just going to be a little bit cooler for the next little while. The temperature's finally hitting some lovely 26, 27 degrees centigrade here in France. Actually, I'm wearing shorts for the first time for the summer. Being a Queenslander, it has to get over 25 for me to get interested in that sort of thing. But today, for those that haven't seen our live crosses, we've mainly been showing them in our group, the remote digital workers and adventure people sort of group. But we decided to go live today from the page, from the Nomad Stays page, just to broaden the message. So this is another one in our series of travel going forward. We're going to jump into this issue of visas today. So for digital nomads, grabbing a visa is one of the bigger issues that we're going to have in our travels, if we haven't had it already. Now, everyone's sort of heard of the classic visa runs. You get to a country, you love it a lot, you're there for a couple of months, and you realise that you've run out of time under your entry mechanism. Your entry mechanism was probably some short stay visa. Many countries this is automatic. Other countries or citizens of other countries have to apply for a short stay visa, but for large populations of the world we are getting our visa automatically. As an Australian, there's very large numbers of countries around the world that let me in automatically without having to apply, or with very little application. Anyway, we get to the end of our 3-month period, typically 90 days, 3 months, and we need to take a visa run. We need to leave the country and go to another country to have our passport stamped into another country. So it's obvious, because this is our common document that every country gets to look at, these amazing 100-year-old creatures called passports. And anyway, we then get to go back to where we've been enjoying ourselves the last few months with a new passport stamp. Now, that works really well while you can travel countries. COVID has created a big problem there. We also have that second issue that some countries don't allow you to come back in for a while. Here in Europe, most people, or many people, I won't say most, but many people use the generic Schengen visa, as it's colloquially known. The right to come into the Schengen zone, a whole group of countries that share a common internal border, come into the Schengen zone and spend 3 months out of every 6 months in these countries. In this case, a border run isn't that easy, because you've got to be out of the Schengen zone for 3 months before you can come back in. And we get this massively complex arrangement where people go from, France, Germany, Italy, whatever, and they go down to Morocco, or they head over to a non-Schengen zone area like the US or to the UK. Maybe it's into Croatia for 3 months and come back. And that's quite disruptive from a business point of view. That's probably not going to change that much with the COVID world, but the issue is with COVID is that the borders are closed and they're slowly opening up. So remaining legal when you can't leave the country has become an issue in some places. We've had that here in France. We came into the country about roughly 3 months ago. Now I already have a long stay residency permit here for France under their French Tech visa program, but my co-founder hadn't been able to get hers yet. She came in under well, who knows what visa she came in. It might have been the classic Schengen visa, or it might have been the bilateral visa between Australia and France, which allows you to stay 3 months independent of other Schengen countries. It's another sort of complexity. Okay. Getting ready to lodge all our documents for Linda to remain in France, get her tech visa, COVID happens, a few days before our appointment, the prefecture, which handles immigration, is shut. And they say we don't know how to handle this for the moment. Everything becomes a bit of an issue. Well, that's been going on, as you know, most of the world's been locked down for a couple of months, so that has gone on. The 3-month visa, 90-day visa, whatever it is for France, has now run out. Well, for people with visas like myself, the government had already extended the visa by an extra 3 months or 6 months, depending on the countries. I think the Germans extended it for 6 months. So we got an automatic extension. Well, so what? That didn't actually concern me too much because it doesn't expire for another few years. But the countries didn't expand on the short stay visa. They expected everybody that was on these short stay visas to return to their own countries. Well, the world has since seen that some 2/3 of digital nomads didn't return to their own countries. In fact, Australians, some 80% of the Australians spread out around the world, did not go home. So Australians, that's expats and overseas workers, as well as the digital nomads, preferred to stay travelling. And that, while it's been reflected in a lot of countries, has created this mass of people, you might be one of them, that's sitting there wondering what's happening with my visa. Well, in France they had a mechanism where you could apply to get your short stay visa extended. We applied when they said basically send us an email. There's nothing publicly available. Indeed, their websites are still saying we don't know what we're going to do yet, but it'll be something like this. But we applied, no answer. Visa time came and went. No border run possible, no leaving of the country possible. Technically, we think, Linda became an illegal immigrant in France. Well, we don't really want that. But again, it's not really that much of an issue when you've got good, considerate governments around the world that recognise what's going on. I'm probably not the only one saying that I've crossed borders without visas or had passports stamped. Quite normal in developing countries where the border crossings are not so tight, the computer systems break down, they get fixed up later. In the Western world, we're not really used to that sort of a play. So it's a little bit concerning, particularly the Anglos amongst us that like to abide by the rules. So we haven't heard of anybody being forcibly thrown out, deported, with a few exceptions. Internal Australian stuff is a little bit different. But no real move around the world to throw people out of the country, which is a nice, refreshing thing. The other thing to recognise, we were talking with the immigration officer yesterday because we got an appointment. Finally, it was a private appointment. We said to this immigration officer, I said, did you get locked down? Did you get thrown out of the office? He said, no, actually, I have been, beyond the first couple of weeks, I have been here working every day. We have nowhere near the volume of work stacking up, which is why there's only one booth operating, but it's been business as usual. Okay, so these departments, although they're saying they are shut down, there's no processing being done, and indeed publicly on the French websites it says no visas are being issued right now. We know from first-hand experience that they are. There was people that went in before us, and I'm sure there were people that went out into the visa processing after us. Usual arrangements, masks, separation, no waiting room, people there, although we noticed the waiting room, every second chair had been removed. Looks like it's social distancing is here to stay. So this is actually happening. So message here, relax, don't worry, communicate with your immigration departments. Many of them still won't know what's going on. The processing people you're dealing with probably don't know what's going on. And you can't expect border people to understand either. The visa processing stuff is exceptionally complex, and the border officers, police, whatever you want to call them in each border, probably don't know all the rules. But they're just looking for some level of fairness and cooperation from people. Okay. So we've got to go travelling for business soon. We've got to leave the country. And that is getting a little bit difficult still. There is some internal opening up of borders, or discussion of internal opening up of borders here in Europe. They're really trying to kickstart the tourism economy again. It's such a major part of the EU economy that they really need it going. As you probably already know, France is the #1 visited country in the world, Spain #2. It's a huge impact on the economy, particularly of regional parts of Europe, very large regional parts of Europe. So the governments are trying to kickstart this while control the virus situation. So the issue of, shall we open the borders? Shall we open all the borders or some of the borders? Do we install quarantine when people cross the borders? Do we allow them not to quarantine if they travel with an app? They travel with our app or somebody else's app. So all of these discussion points are all being negotiated between countries at the moment. As you may or may not have seen, for instance, France to England has still got open borders. Now our closest airport happens to be Geneva. So Geneva's airport, or the part of the airport that we need to use, is actually on the Swiss side of the border. It's within our 100-kilometre travelling range, so technically we're allowed to travel up to that area, but we can't cross the border because the French-Swiss border is still largely closed. Going into Switzerland. Coming out of Switzerland, it's a different matter. Don't expect this stuff to resolve itself very early. For us, we can head down to Lyon. French airport. Lyon has direct flights to London. Great. The UK-France borders have not been closed. But the French have just said, actually, you don't need to quarantine if you're coming from the UK, but the UK is probably going to involve quarantining by the latest reports. In fact, they wanted to do a reciprocal arrangement with the French so that French arriving, or people arriving from France into the UK didn't need to quarantine for 14 days, like the French had offered the UK. But the EU said, no, if it's good enough for the French, it's good enough for every country. And of course, things now get stuck down in massive diplomatic negotiations. And, you know, I don't have a great insight to what the discussions are behind the scenes. A lot of it's written up in really boring government reports and notes and things like that. So I'm, like you, following a lot of the media interest with great interest. And it is changing, and there's people backtracking on their observations all the time. End result is, it's going to be slow crossing borders. You're probably going to have to negotiate or justify what's going on a little bit more. It's no good getting cranky with border patrol officers and immigration officers. They're just trying to get their job done. Their job is to keep the economy going. They're probably getting pressure from people above to get the economies moving. So they might be told to be faster and maybe a little bit less stringent in some of this activity going on. But regardless, you're still going to see probably delays at airports, delays at crossing borders that we haven't seen largely for a long time. I say largely because if I go back 18 months, I dropped off Linda in the States at Atlanta airport, and I was there for a little bit longer, and she had to fly over to LA and then back to Australia. And it took more than 3 hours to get through and board the plane through security, and it wasn't even immigration at that stage, it was largely just security to get onto the plane. Obviously she missed the plane, there was 5 other flights now, had to be rerouted to get her to LA, she missed the flight back to Australia. All that stuff gets sorted out in the long run. But 3 hours to get onto a plane, a domestic plane, we're used to sort of 10 to 20 minutes, but 3 hours, and that was in the middle of the shutdown that the US government placed on workers at airports and air traffic control and so forth. And the government shut down over some budgetary fights that President Trump was having with his Congress. So there weren't people working. There was a shortfall of people. In the post-corona world, we're going to see more of that. We're going to see workers, even in airports, need to keep social distancing. The volumes of people working and processing may go down. The consequence is it takes longer to get processed going through the borders. Probably on the positive side, there's going to be less people travelling on planes. Some planes are removing their middle seats, social distancing, all that sort of stuff. Other planes are not. Each airport is going to have different configurations of planes coming in and different passenger loads coming in. We might still be seeing airlines running 300-400 passengers on a plane, and other airlines scaling down to maybe 100-150. Obviously, loading 150 people is a lot faster and easier than loading 300 or 400. So don't get worried, it's going to take longer. If it takes shorter, I think that's going to be a bonus for the next little while. The other indication is that this social distancing, mask-based economy, and you may have seen that Spain has now insisted that everybody wear masks in public, as many other countries do. I just got pictures this morning from South Korea, complete mandatory over there. I was talking to one of my staff in Philippines, same thing, massive restrictions, masks, in fact even gloves everywhere. This regime of distancing and masks and greater forced safety and health is with us for some time. It may be a few years. So this is the new. We are probably years away going back to that almost flippant way that we would jump on a plane for 37 cents, fly to another country, pick our bag up, and off we go, jump onto a bus, a train, a tube, whatever. That stuff is just going to take a little bit longer, and it's going to take a while to work this stuff out. After 9/11 in the United States, it was well over a year before the US government got control of their boarding in airports properly. I remember it was a year after 9/11 to the day, +1. I refused to fly on exactly the same day. I added one day. Day +1, it was still taking 3 hours to get through immigration, extra security checks, you name it, getting onto planes. Now, as an Australian, I was also highlighted for extra checks. So as a foreigner, you may be subjected to extra scrutiny as you're coming through airports of foreign countries these days. So that's just the new you. So I think, we love our travel. As I talked about the other day, for those that saw, the travel gene is amongst us. It's natural to get out and go exploring, meet new people in the world, to travel through countries. We're not going to let this stop our dreams. We're not going to let this stop our dreams of creating businesses and jobs. In fact, there's even more people trying to be self-reliant these days because their employers have shut down or let them go. That's fairly big. Again, in Australia, some 50% of the working population is now on some level of welfare. So, massive impact. It's going to take years to resolve this sort of thing. So we're out looking to travel more, and it's just a matter of how you handle it. Recommendations: keep your grace, keep your cool, have your documents ready, be able to justify in a firm but clear manner how you're crossing the border and for what reasons. Now, you might tweak some of those reasons to hit on the hot buttons that are popular reasons to allow people to cross the border. Business is obviously a big one. Being self-employed, you've probably got more chance, for those of you that are self-employed, that is, freelancers and so forth, you probably have more chance of justifying your travel, international travel, than an employee that doesn't have a note from their employer telling them that they have to go X, Y, and Z. So be ready to justify and present this. Again, in France, we have a 100-kilometre distance as of a week ago that you can travel. Over the weekend, the French police tested, is probably the right word, they reviewed 200,000 travellers driving down some highways to find whether people were staying within their 100-kilometre limit. And they picked up more than 1,000 people that they find that were outside of their 100-kilometre limit. So greater scrutiny and greater attention to travelling is going to occur. Again, the governments are trying to stop the movement of the virus. Luckily, the virus is actually not that widespread around the world. I know it's all doom and gloom in the newspapers, but look at the stats. The worst hit countries have got something like a 5% infection rate, and a much, much lower death rate, obviously. 5% infection means 95% of the populations of UK, France, Italy, Spain, these bigger countries that have been hit, are still testing coronavirus free. And so the government all these governments, they don't want to see that spread too far. They want to keep the limitation down. Hence, these restrictions are going to be around for some time. So, how do we keep travelling? Same. We'll probably find ourselves travelling across borders by road a little bit more. And again, keeping an understanding about what border crossings are starting to open. And it may not be wholesale. We've got a motorbike over in Bulgaria at the moment. As some of you know, we're pretty keen adventure motorcyclists, and the snow came in early, so we had to leave the bike in Bulgaria before we travelled on to Spain, as it turned out. Actually Romania, then Spain. So we're keen to get the motorcycle back. It's obviously beautiful weather. France has got magnificent roads. It's a very pretty country. Just want to get out there and enjoy some of that in this beautiful weather, but can't get it at the moment. So are we going to see this wholesale opening of borders inside the EU? I actually think we will in about a month's time. It's my gut feeling, just based on the way the conversation's going, the way it's being reported in the media, and also having dealt with government for many years, just knowing how governments work and what they're trying to aim for gives me a little bit of a feeling that they'll open up broadly inside the Schengen zone in the next month. In the meantime, there are individual borders that are being opening. So Austria, Slovenia opened up today. Bulgaria, Serbia will open up in a couple of days' time. Oh, okay, so to get my motorbike from Bulgaria back here to France, I've got to get a flight to Bulgaria, actually not too hard. So I get a flight to Bulgaria, pick up the bike. Now the next crossing is, can I go Bulgaria, Serbia? Yes. It may or may not be my preferred route, but if it's an open route, I'll change myself to be travelling that way. Serbia, alright. Slovenia, I don't think they border. Oh, perhaps they do. Alright, you start remapping your routes based on what is open at the borders. Again, carrying more paperwork to justify what's going on. Keeping accurate records of the dates, maybe even the times that you're crossing the borders. Maybe having receipts, cafes and things to prove where you've been. Just to make the border police, the immigration officers, more comfortable that you're on top of things and taking it all very seriously. Being flippant's probably not the way to go for the next little while. And border crossings have always been a problem. I remember only, what was it? It was only about 6 or 7 months ago we had some problems coming from Greece into Bulgaria. We think, inadvertently overstayed our Schengen visa. We didn't actually think we had, because we'd only been in Greece a week, and our previous 3 or 4 months had been in countries that had bilateral agreements with Australia, France and Italy and Germany, where they count the Australians' time in those countries very differently than Schengen. But in Greece, where there isn't a bilateral agreement, the Greek government counted all of our time in all those other countries as part of Schengen. And so they warned us, oh, you probably won't be allowed back in the country for at least a month. And this was after about 3 hours worth of negotiations and discussion and showing of our routes and our times and our proof points. The immigration officers basically accepted our argument and let us go with a warning. It got us wondering what the hell we'd broken, and we've since found out how we think that they calculate the time. But this stuff's going to be even more so in the next little while, probably for the next 2 years. So, do you avoid crossing borders? Absolutely not. You just got to get better at planning. Turn up, have your documents easy, present yourself nice and comfortably, professionally, hold your ground when you know what's going on, try and educate the border officers if they have an issue. Sometimes they just might not know the rules, they might be tired, they might have other things going on. They're just humans that need to be processing everything at the same time as you do. One of probably the more consequential aspects of crossing the border, as I was just describing, is if it's going to take longer, you might be getting into the next country later in the day. You might not be able to travel as far to your preferred city. So now you might find you need accommodation closer to the border. Now, finding accommodation in regional areas during the COVID economic crisis is going to be a little bit harder. Some 95% of hotels in France are still shut down according to the latest reports. So just turning up and finding an Airbnb, where actually probably not a great choice, because many countries are taking this opportunity to try and shrink that Airbnb market further. Okay, turning up at a hotel that was there on the map, probably a little bit riskier. So planning ahead, finding out who's open, who can take a booking, is going to be a lot easier. Again, use Nomad Stays. We only take bookings for places that we can sell bookings for, that are open, that are legal, and all of that. And you can get that very, very quickly. So think about crossing borders taking longer, arriving in a country later, maybe a little bit harder finding some of these restaurants, maybe it's a bit more takeaway. It's just probably going to take a little bit longer to get to your destination these days. And it's going to continue to change. At the moment things are changing daily, or in case of the UK, almost twice a day. It's going to probably change fairly consistently over at least the next 6 months. But the borders are opening, the planes are starting to fly, the price of the flights are not necessarily over the top. So there is opportunities to be getting out there, particularly when you've got some business reason to make things happen. I'm going to leave it up there. I'm going to invite you to all come and join the conversation over in our group. You'll see that link to the page here. Come and join us in the group, come and swap some stories, tell us what you're finding, tell us if you've got some issues, your concerns. We'll hunt down some stuff if we can. We'll tell you our experience. We've been tracking this stuff fairly consistently, so we'd love to help, and look forward to seeing you next time. So from myself and my Chief Happiness Officer here, we wish you a great day. Cheers for now.